G'day and welcome to the Choosing Your Uni National Virtual Expo. I'm your MC for today's session. My name is Rob Malicki and I'm on Garigal land in Sydney. I'm acknowledging the traditional custodians of this magnificent land on which I live and work. And today's session is an incredibly special one. You know, one of the things that I was really hoping to do with this National Virtual Expo was to explain what uni is all about anyway. We make this assumption that people just instinctively know what uni is even about. And so as part of this virtual expo, we've been running sessions to try and demystify what university is really like. We've done sessions about what campus life is about, what extracurricular opportunities you have, and all sorts of things in between. And today, my guest is Thomas Beltrame from Flinders University. Thomas is a PhD candidate. And a PhD, a doctorate degree, makes you a doctor at the end, maybe not a medical doctor, but makes you a doctor, is the top level of qualification you can essentially have at an Australian university, in fact, at any university. It's the end of the university journey for most students. Well, not most students, but students who want to go as far as they possibly can. But what does that even mean? So the reason I wanted to get Thomas on was to talk about his whole journey through university. And so in this session, we're going to be talking about what's an undergraduate bachelor degree anyway? What does that even mean? What does a master's mean? What's a postgraduate qualification? And what is a doctorate or PhD program? So by the end of this session, you're going to have a great idea about the full breadth of academic opportunities that are available at university. Now, if you've got any questions, Thomas and I are going to be having a conversation together, so we won't be answering questions in real time, but please add them into the chat. So whether you're watching on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, hello, thank you for joining us live. You can drop your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them. If not at the end of this session, then definitely via the Choosing Your Uni Discord. So all of the questions that get asked throughout the expo are all getting put into the Discord. It's your opportunity to participate in a conversation, to help others, and to ask your own questions, whether those are like really specific questions about your personal circumstances or very general questions about university. The Choosing Your Uni Discord is there for you. Details in the session description below. And for parents and supporters, we also have a Facebook community just for you, because of course you've got different questions and you're actually on Facebook. Younger people are not on Facebook these days, but for the rest of us, we're on Facebook and you can ask your questions there. Now, before I bring in Thomas, just one thing I want to note is that he's doing this advanced research program. He's an engineer and his research project is utterly fascinating. What we want to do in this conversation is talk a little bit about his specific research, but we really want to talk more broadly about that journey through university. So Thomas has what's called a 3-minute thesis. It's essentially a video, a really nice one, that explains his specific research project. and you'll find that in the description below as well. So if you've watched this session and you're wondering more specifically about his research, the easiest way to find out in detail about it in 3 minutes is via that video that you'll find down there in the session description. I've met Thomas before. He's an articulate, smart guy. Flinders is doing really interesting stuff in the space in which he's working. So let's go and jump on the couch and have a chat with Thomas Beltrame. Let's go. Thomas Beltrame, welcome to the National Virtual Expo.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Look, I'm really stoked to have you here. Of course, like uni is such a journey, and you've been on quite the journey. Before we maybe go back and talk about that, like where are you up to right now in your studies, or if you finished studies, work? Yeah, bring us up to speed.
Hopefully coming to the end of my university journey. This is year number 9 for me. I'm in the 4th year of my PhD in biomedical engineering.
That might make some people shudder with fear. The idea of being at uni for 10 years.
Yeah, it's something that I didn't plan on. I did a master's degree in biomedical engineering, and the way that Flinders University does that is a combined degree. So rather than doing a 4-year honours and then a 2-year master's, which is standard, they mashed them up into one. And that really excited me because I went at that point in high school, there's no way I'm going to do a PhD. I'll do my 5 years, I'll get out. But then I ended up figuring out that I really did have a passion for research, and we'll touch on that as we go through, but that's essentially what drew me back in.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to explore that whole journey from the start. So, but before we get there, one more question then. So what are you doing like right now? So you're saying you're finishing up, but like what does that actually mean to be getting towards the end of a PhD program?
Yes, for me, that means a lot of thesis writing. So I have done a pilot trial exploring the effects of a novel virtual reality application that I built, which uses music-supported neurotherapy to try and improve upper limb function in stroke survivors. So that was a big kind of 2 to 3 year development effort to build it, test it with stroke survivors and other professionals to make sure that it's appropriate. And now I'm writing up the results in a very big book that will be the thesis.
And you and I connected recently. I was actually visiting down at Flinders University about a month ago and had a chance to actually experience your technology firsthand. That shows me interacting with your virtual reality headset and the app, so you can actually see what I was seeing inside that virtual reality headset, and I'm moving my hands. And essentially the idea, Thomas, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that this helps a stroke survivor to, who's recovering in rehabilitation, to move in such a way is to help essentially reprogram the brain, if I could be as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's using a concept called neuroplasticity, which is basically what we all have access to, and that's how we can still pick up new skills as adults, but it's really, really dominant in children in early development and directly after a traumatic brain injury like stroke. So I'm re-networking the pathways, you could say, and the way that I'm doing that is through neurotherapy, which is called a non-intensive motor practice. And what that basically means is by moving one side of the body and by looking at the reflection of that side on the stroke affected side, you can actually improve the side that isn't moving, which is quite remarkable in my opinion.
It is remarkable. So I reckon we'll dive into that in a little bit more when we loop back to talk about PhD or doctorate programs, as they are sometimes known as well. But maybe we can go right back to the start of your university experience. And so for those people who are brand new to uni, maybe just to set a little bit of context for them, the first degree that, and a degree is a qualification, so the first qualification that most people traditionally do at university is what's called a bachelor's degree, sometimes called an undergraduate degree. That's the entry point for many students. You do have some alternatives to that. So some people might come in through a diploma or through a pathway, but typically a bachelor is the entry point. Thomas, so tell us about your journey into uni. What did you do coming out of school? What did you head in to do as part of your undergraduate program?
Yep, absolutely. So Bachelor's typically 3 years. In engineering, we do it a little bit differently. We have an honours as basically a requirement, and that's to certify us with Engineers Australia, our major accrediting body. So everyone by default will do a 4-year program, and that includes a 1-year final year project at the end that is your honours project. As I mentioned at the start, I wanted to go one level higher and get the master's, and really I did that because I knew that it had a bit more of prestige associated with it. I thought coming out of uni it would give me a better chance to get a job. And because it was a double degree in the same thing, so it was an honours in biomed, a master's in biomed, that actually gave me some flexibility to choose the topics that I was interested in outside of the biomedical realm, which normally you don't get to do because engineering programs are really, really tightly controlled to meet those requirements from our professional bodies. So I got to delve into the robotics land, which strengthened my programming ability, which ultimately fed into the project that I'm doing now.
Yeah, look, super interesting. Before I ask you my next question, just for those people watching along, an honours program is typically something that's added on at the end of an undergraduate bachelor's degree. So you do your 3 years, and typically then you do a 1-year. Often it's an add-on, and it's essentially a piece of research. It's a 1-year research project, although the model of that differs from degree to degree and uni to uni.
Just to add further, outside of engineering, it's normally competitive entry programs. So generally you finish your bachelor's and then you have to apply and get accepted into honours. Whereas in the engineering case, it's part of the degree. So it's a different model, but it forces everyone to have a bit of background research rigor associated with the degree, which you wouldn't get otherwise. So I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, that's a really good pickup. And in some cases like yours, you had already that entry into your honours program guaranteed straight out of high school. So in some cases you can go into like Bachelor of Science honours, and that's its own degree, or other times you start in a Bachelor of Science and you add on the honours later. So this is the uni world that's kind of complex and strange, that's hard to navigate, but that's how those pieces fit together. But for you, Thomas, what I was interested in is like when you came out of high school, that feels like a pretty big commitment, right? To be going in and saying, okay, I'm committing to 5 years, and it's the whole hog. It's bachelor's, an honours program, and then a master's behind. Did that feel overwhelming in some way?
A little bit. I think what I wish I knew when I was going through school is that degrees are way more flexible than you think they are. So you see these programs listed in the brochures and you go, right, I'm committing to 3, 4, 5 years and that's going to lock me in. But you can move in and out of those programs really, really simply. So I had quite a few people that started in the 5-year program and went, actually, the honours is going to be enough, and then dropped down to the 4-year, still graduated with an honours degree and went into the workforce. I had other friends that went, I want to go that next step, and they came in the honours program and then shifted up. And then I had friends that completely flipped out of biomed as well. And I think that's a real testament to the way that Flinders does engineering, where we purposely have our entire first year as the same. So normally you'd have very narrow topics, and the moment you start specializing in one area, you lose credit if you try and transfer. But Flinders basically says, we're going to show you what standard engineering, maths, physics, programming, mechanics and electronics looks like. And then from there, you can decide if you're in the right degree or if you want to take a step sideways. So that helped with the overwhelmingness of what the degree was going to be in terms of length. But the other thing is that year on year, you build in your specialty. So I came into biomed with a bit of an idea of I want to help people and I want to use technology to do that, but I don't know which area. And it wasn't until I got to my second and even third year that I really nailed down the rehabilitation and assistive technology was going to be a core part of that.
I love your story, mate, because it's exactly what I think people need to know. You know, we have this, everyone says, oh, you've got to find your passion, you've got to figure it out. And it's actually not true, I believe, for 99% of people. There's 1%, yeah, sure, they know it, they want to do this thing out of you, like, sure, okay, those people know. For most of us, your passion comes as you go along. The more you get into things, you discover more, you get expertise, you get skills and experience, and then suddenly you find the thing and you're like, this is what lights me up. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's almost impossible to know what you want to do before you've seen it. So we can watch documentaries, listen to interviews like these and articles, and think we have an idea of what professions mean. But until you're studying and then working in that space, it's actually really, really hard to quantify. And a lot of them you just may not even hear about. So, for example, when I was coming through, I had no idea what an occupational therapist was or a music therapist. And it's only now that I've really gone quite deep into my PhD that I've realized those are professions that I might have also been really interested in had I known a bit more about them in high school. I don't really want to go to 11 or 12 years, so I don't think I'll do a master's of those degrees, but it's nice to know what else is out there and how to work alongside those professions.
If I can just quickly tell a personal story, you and I share some overlap in terms of interests. And I think I may have told you this story when we caught up. When I was doing my undergraduate, I did a science degree as my first degree, but I was really interested in music. And I ended up finding this incredibly niche, and this honestly could have been my career and would have been freaking brilliant, that there are specialists in the world. In fact, there was one at the time who was a specialist in using sound to essentially scare birds away from airports. That was their specialty in terms of research.
Yep.
And basically, this person was a consultant to every airport in the world. They traveled the world getting paid a mozza because they had a fascination around, sound, music, and they were able to marry that with their passion for biology and wildlife. And that was a job, like an amazing job, right? And I remember looking at that being like, I could literally email that person now and say, hey, I want to be your protege. And that literally could have been me, and it would have been a great life. But like, as you're saying, how would you even have known about something so niche, let alone become interested in it, unless you were at uni?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. On a similar vein, I picked up piano kind of late in my schooling journey, but through work experience, I tried two different things. One, I thought mechanical engineering sounds interesting. I'll go work at a mechanics shop. Hated it. I realized I do not go well with car engines and that sort of thing. So that kind of squashed that away. But then the other one I did was working with a piano tuner who serviced the Mid-North region in around the Port Augusta, Port Pirie, Mid-North area in South Australia, which is where I was living at the time. And I think he would have liked to have taken me on as his protege if he knew I wasn't already going to engineering. But it's something that, yeah, until you see it and you're there with the different instruments and seeing how it goes, it's just something that you can't really appreciate. So my big piece of advice is to anyone curious, just send an email or pick up the phone and ask someone and say, hey, can I work with you for a week and just see where this goes? And it might open your eyes to something that you had no idea about before.
Such great advice, like give things a go. That's where you actually discover what you like. And what you like becomes things that you're deeply interested in, and things you're deeply interested in eventually becomes things that you are really good at and you're passionate about. It's not the other way around, like everybody makes out. Your passion doesn't just come first, it actually comes last. So I love the way you're telling that story. Let's talk about that undergraduate program then. Mm-hmm. So studying your first degree, a bachelor's. We've talked a bit about engineering, but what sort of other things did you get involved in? What doors were open to you when you were doing your undergraduate at Flinders?
Yeah, so I really like to try a lot of new things. I came from quite a heavy sports background, so I had a moderate athletics career in high school. Realized pretty quickly as soon as I jumped to the state level that I was no longer competitive outside of the little country town I grew up in, but that enjoyment of sport has stayed with me. So immediately I want to play volleyball, try a new team sport for me. And that took me through the first 3 years of the degree. And then I jumped into squash and absolutely fell in love with it so much that I restarted and then became the vice president of the Flinders Uni Squash and Racquetball Club for quite a number of years. I've actually only just let that go. So that's been something that I've enjoyed a lot. And that's on the outside of academia side entirely. I then, staying a little bit closer to academia, looked at the Flinders Uni Robotics Club. And at that time, they had this WAM-V, which was basically an autonomous surface vessel. So a really big in the research space, small from a chartered boat perspective, but a boat that would carry people sorry, not people, carry research exercises across the water independently. So the idea was you'd hit play, let it do its thing, and using the sensors on board, it would be able to navigate obstacles, fire projectiles in particular spaces, rescue buoys that were floating around, and that's water buoys, not people. And I was involved in some of the 3D modeling of that space and actually coming up with an economic way to build a floating buoy rather than buying one off the shelf. So that gave me some exposure outside of my degree, but connected me with people that have given me quite a lot of advice throughout the years and exposed me to areas that I wouldn't have otherwise. And then back in the degree, I watched a documentary by Dr. Jordan Nguyen, who is a biomedical engineer in the rehab and assistive tech space. And he looked at a product or launched a product that enabled someone with cerebral palsy, so someone who couldn't really have the standard motor control that we are familiar with, to control electronic devices through eye tracking. And as soon as I saw that, that was a bit of a like, wow, the body and the electrical systems within us can control different electrical systems in the real world. And that was a bit of an unlock moment. So then I approached my now supervisor, Dr. David Hobbs, now Associate Professor David Hobbs, and he gave me a project that said, all right, if you want to explore this space, do the same sort of thing, but instead of using the eyes, use the mouth. And we called it Face Tracker. And the idea was that you would use different facial expressions to control a computer. And that then became a final year project for someone else, and then eventually got commercialized. And I'm not too sure what's happened now, but that was the beginning of knowing I wanted to go down a rehab and assistive tech pathway.
Yeah, wow. Once again, like, just such a great lesson, right? Not only, as you're exploring these different areas, but you're being proactive. You're actually reaching out to people to try to dive deeper on things that interest you. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that most, probably like most people at uni actually don't do is, and maybe because they don't realize, but if there's something that interests you, just like you said, Thomas, send the email. Nobody, and these days, LinkedIn, like, you can literally contact 90% of the professional world, and everybody loves being asked for advice. They love sharing their stories. If you reach out to just about anyone, of course, not the, like the president of massive companies, but anyone further down, you reach out to them, almost exclusively, people will give you the time of day. And if you do that, you will be rewarded. So just take a moment to, if you find something interesting, reach out to the people who make that happen, and it'll take your career to places you never even dreamed possible.
And my tip with that is be really specific about what you liked about their work. If you just send someone a follow or a LinkedIn connection request without any context, it may not get looked at. I don't always look at mine, but if someone says, hey, Thomas, I really enjoyed your piece about music supported therapy. I'm a musician myself and interested in that space, or I know someone who would like to learn more about this work. Do you mind if we have a call? Straight away, I'm like, yep, that sounds fantastic. If you want to really know what's going on and you've taken the obvious interest in what I've published, then yeah, for sure, let's talk.
Amazing. Great advice. Love it. Tell me about the new combat plan. So I know you and I were talking about having this international study experience as part of an undergraduate degree. And for those people watching along, we've got a whole session on studying abroad as part of your degree, doing international study experiences. You can find that in the session catalogue, details down in the description below. But tell me about your experience, Thomas.
The New Colombo Plan is probably one of my favourite programs across Australia. So it's been set up so that Australian universities can deepen their connection with the Indo-Pacific region. And it was a strategic partnership, which basically means we as Australian university students get funded to a whole number of countries. And the two that I went to were Malaysia and Singapore. So I had a double in my experience. I was very fortunate where I got a short-term 3-week paid placement to go to Malaysia. And then that happened in the summer break, so it didn't actually affect my study. And not only did it not affect it, but it actually helped me because it took out a topic from my year that year. And instead of doing what a few of my friends did and said, woohoo, we've got one less topic to do, let's make this an easy semester, I hung on to it for the rest of my degree until my final year. And when I was doing my final year project and I could just put all my attention in there because I'd already knocked out my other topics, that was a true gift. So it was a very double win where I got an amazing experience overseas and then it made my final year project better. In the next space, I had a 5-month work integrated learning paid placement to go to Singapore. So this one was the first time I'd properly lived out of home. It was me and 5 other Flinders students at a company or a research institution called Nanyang Polytechnic, where a polytechnic is kind of like an in-between of school and university in the Singaporean system. It's a little bit higher than a TAFE, but not quite at the uni level. So it was a new experience again. And we basically got given a project to explore not a lot of direction. So it was the first real self-guided learning that I had to do. And I was looking at facial recognition for a company that had launched a chip. And this is in 2019. So pre the boom of AI where this wasn't standard. And it was a lot of image processing and programming, which ultimately led to the job that I would later get in data science. But at the time, I just saw it as a new opportunity to live in somewhere else, experience a different culture, and get a bit of a fresh perspective on my studies.
Amazing. I'm really keen to explore that data science job in a moment, but just to maybe recap for those people who are watching, I mean, you've been talking about this undergraduate, your bachelor degree, your first program, and you've talked about getting involved in clubs and societies. You've talked about reaching out to academics and connecting with them and doing projects. You've talked about studying overseas as part of your undergrad. And for me, mate, what really resonates is that you've had such a great taste of that university experience. Like you've literally tasted from all of those different pots, you know. And that makes a wonderful experience, not just from an educational point of view, but life experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really important thing is I was on campus the whole time. So engineering is a pretty large study load. We had about 20 contact hours a week. And I went through pre-COVID, so the whole online model wasn't really an option then. We had mandatory labs. You just had to be there. Our lectures could have been online, but you're at uni so much anyway that it just made sense to go. But even if I had the option to stay home, knowing what I know now, there's no way that I would. And same thing for the PhD. 90% of my work I can do at home, but I still choose to come in every day because the physical presence of being at the university, interacting with my colleagues, or at the time, my friends and study companions, it makes such a difference. And it also helps your learning. So we'd walk out of a lecture and go, did anyone understand what was going on here? Or how the heck do we prepare for this shoot? And if you don't have a network of people that you could talk to outside of class because you're there, you lose so much of the university experience. So yes, the assessments and the degree you get at the end are the reason that you're going, but everything that happens in between those classes, I think, is actually more beneficial.
Absolutely. Let's move on to your masters. So you've kind of done this, you've done your undergrad, then you've done this combined honours masters, which is an interesting structure. So let's talk about postgrad. So for those people watching along, a postgraduate qualification is what you do after your undergraduate. So it's post-graduation, post your first graduation. And that takes lots of different forms. You can do a postgraduate diploma, you can do a master's degree, which is kind of like the standard, if you like. And there are other sorts of different nuances as well. But maybe talk about your program, Thomas. What was your postgraduate experience like?
Yeah, so
sorry, maybe can I make that a double-barreled question? Normally, you should never ask double-barreled questions, but I feel like it's appropriate. So what was it like, and how was it different to your undergraduate program?
Yep, for sure. So mine was a little bit funny because I mentioned it was the 5-year combined program. It was actually still an undergrad. So I did something called a master's by coursework rather than a master's by research. So I didn't technically do an honours project, but I inherited the title through the rest of my studies. So I've only had one graduation so far, and it was the combined testament. So I've only got one degree. I'll get a second when I finish the PhD, but that's how my program worked. But normally, yes, you would do an honours first, graduate, and then come back and do the masters. For me, it was an opportunity to explore the rehab and assistive tech way and combine my passion of music. So it was studying for my rehab and assistive tech exam. I looked over at my guitar and kind of thought, if I didn't have the level of motor function that I do, I wouldn't be able to play the guitar the way that I do. I wouldn't be able to play the piano the way that I do. And then I kind of went through and listed all the instruments in my head and went, there's really not a lot that you can play without the ability to do this. Yeah. So I wanted to create a music platform that would enable people with less motor function to still experience the joys and the benefits of music. And I did that through an assistive electronic trumpet, which doubled as a respiratory rehab device. So when you have an abdominal or thoracic surgery, you'll get given a device called an incentive spirometer, where you have to take a big breath in, and that's supposed to clear out your airways and prevent you from getting a PPC, which is a post-operative pulmonary complication, which can sometimes be worse than the thing that you got the surgery for in the first case. So it's a big, big problem, but nobody uses it, or not to the level that you're supposed to. And my assumption was because it's really boring. So I thought if I add music to this element, then we're able to encourage people to get some auditory feedback as well as the visual feedback of seeing a float rise up and down. And I treated the masters as an opportunity to do just that. So it was a design and build. I got to source, then purchase the electronic components. I used a pressure sensor, an irrigation pipe, and a cheap Bluetooth module that I found off eBay, and basically built an app from scratch to do just that.
Oh, that's cool. So really the difference that I'm hearing between undergrad, which is much more like coursework, and you need to go to all of these different classes and you do assignments and assessments and you get marks for those individual classes. Once you're into that more pure postgrad space, it's about taking on a project or a problem and then doing independent work, research, potentially then creating a solution as part of that overall project.
Yeah, spot on. So in the undergrad space, you're doing a lot of learning, and then in the postgrad space, you're doing a lot of contribution back to the field. So we come back to this idea of novelty a lot, where you try and synthesize everything that exists and then add to it. And it can be a substantial or what might seem minor on the outside contribution, but that's really the criteria. That it has to be different. It has to be something that no one's thought about before, or an adaptation of research that's already been conducted.
What's fascinating, and most people watching this won't know this, but this is literally how human knowledge is moved forward. Literally, it is because we have knowledge, people learn that knowledge, and then you've got this subset of people, whether that's researchers, academics, students, who are trying to push that knowledge further. So what you've described is literally the process by which all new human knowledge is essentially created. And what I love about this structure is that everyone, you, me, anyone watching this, can participate in that advancement of human knowledge in an area that interests them.
Yeah, and it can be so broad. So we're talking a lot about science and technology here because that's both of our backgrounds, but you can do further research in any discipline. So I've got friends that are in the humanities and arts and social science space doing some really fascinating work in there. So we've got things about the way that conspiracy theories evolve, and looking in the archaeology space of dating of different digs that you can find. So it's not always what's the next program or application or material that we can develop, but there's a very broad array, and it never ends. And this is something that I actually got a bit confused about. When I was in year 12, I was looking at all the maths and science textbooks going, we figured everything out by now, haven't we? Why do people even do PhDs? Haven't we got it all? And then the further I went through the uni, the more I realized, we have a good understanding of the fundamentals, but once you start asking the really deep questions, you realize that there's so much that we don't know. So we definitely need more people to have a research approach.
And so do you think it's fair to say that that's what a PhD is about? It's about asking even bigger questions?
Absolutely. There's a graphic that I've seen which basically shows like a circle where you've got here's the general human knowledge gets
Yeah.
bigger and bigger and bigger, but the PhD focuses on one point and it just gets tinier and tinier and tinier, and then you become the expert in that one space that is your topic. And that doesn't mean that you're a generalist and can answer questions about anything, but it means in the area that you have studied, you know more than anyone else in the world at the time that you publish, either because you've created something new or because you've discovered something that no one else has put forward. And that's quite an exciting thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really true. A friend of mine did her PhD on learning abroad, so student exchange stuff, and looking deep into the data about the outcomes of when you have this kind of international study experience like you had. What does that mean for your career? And is literally one of the world experts on that topic. She's now very senior at an Australian university, an amazing human being, but that experience that she's got as that domain expert, even a decade later, people are still coming to her for advice and insights because she's literally one of the world experts on it.
Yep. Yep. And then even if you decide to move out of research, the skills, the critical thinking, the analytical design of how to conduct and evaluate good research is something that will stay with you forever. So there's no need to go, right, it's only worth doing a PhD if I'm then going to become an academic. I actually came in with the assumption that I'd take my PhD and run and go straight back to industry because I didn't really see myself in this path. Now that I'm getting towards the end of my PhD, I'm going, there's a lot of questions that I haven't answered about my exact topic that I'd love to delve into. So I might hang around for a bit longer, but it was something that I knew at the end of the day, I wanted whatever I built to be out in the real world, which means I have to be in the commercial space in some capacity. Haven't quite figured out what that'll look like yet, but that's the pathway that I'm looking at.
My guest today is Thomas Beltrame from Flinders University. He's currently getting close to finishing his PhD program. We've been talking about the whole journey through university from like an undergraduate right through to a doctorate degree. So Thomas, looking back on all the experiences you've had, how would you summarise that experience for someone? Or what advice would you have for somebody who's sitting there trying to decide to go into this maybe for the first time, about, figuring out how far they might need to go with this?
Yep, that's a good question. And I've been in a few different roles in the uni as well. So another position I have is as a student ambassador, and that means that I represent the College of Science and Engineering in Flinders more broadly at events and talking to students and adults. And something I see time and time again is parents asking the questions on behalf of the student, and you see the student disinterested and you kind of look at that and go, I don't know if you actually want to do the degree that your parents think you do. And that's probably my biggest piece of advice is you have to be really not just happy, but excited by the prospect of working in your field for a long time. So really make sure you look at all the options, stay curious, ask as many questions as you can, and feel free to switch. So if you start a degree and go, this isn't anything like I was sold or promised or had the image in my head, I don't think I can work in this for 40 years. Don't finish a degree just because you started it. You can move into a different college, or you can leave the university entirely and explore something else. I think the work-life balance and satisfaction is something that we're moving towards in a really positive way now, where you don't have to do a job just because it's what you're qualified in. So that's something that I find quite reassuring. And then, as we've said, show up to your classes, engage as best you can. Universities are something where very literally the more you put in, the more you get out. At the age of AI, it's very easy to take shortcuts and get syntheses of knowledge, and it's up to you whether you actually want that or not. So in my late stage of the PhD, I was getting quite tight in my timeline, so I made the decision to use AI to help me do some of the programming. And I did that in an informed way, acknowledging that I could already program. I'd done those steps and I was using this as a speed booster. But if I hadn't started that would have been a terrible approach, because then I would have missed out on those critical learnings of how to actually think and how to code in the way that I needed to. So that's my big advice. Use AI responsibly and make sure that you are choosing what you want to learn, because that will govern everything in the next stages of your life.
I'm glad you raised it, and this wasn't pre-arranged, but we've actually got some great sessions on how to use AI as part of this virtual expo. It's a huge topic. We've got sessions with the University of New England talking about how to use it as part of your study. We're talking about AI fundamentals. We talk about AI safety. We talk about AI and how that's impacting the workforce, because it's a huge topic. And I really recommend if you're interested in this space, it's literally going to affect every degree and every area of work over the next decade. Hone in on some of those sessions. They're incredibly valuable. I've got one more question for you, Thomas, but before that, I just want to pick up another thing you said about changing.
Yep.
1/3 of people will never work in a job that relates to their first degree. 1/3 of people go to uni and end up doing something else. And I'm one of them. I did a science degree, have never worked outside of uni when I was at uni, never worked a day in science in my life. Does that mean it's a waste? No, of course not. Like, I use the skills from that degree every single day, right down to when I was setting up the microphones and the video for our conversation here today. That's something I did in my undergraduate. So when people say, oh, uni's not worth it anymore, that's absolute crap. It gives you fundamental skills that you will use literally every day of your life. That doesn't mean you shouldn't change if you hate what you're doing. Absolutely, you should. But as long as you're enjoying what you're doing, if you never end up going to work as a scientist, yours truly, that doesn't matter. The skills are what persist.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think it's something that you will find a way to incorporate the learnings from those degree into what you do, if it's something that you do enjoy. So using myself as an example, I did the 5-year biomed degree. I went, yep, I've got a double biomed engineering degree. I'm gonna be hired by all the top biomed companies in Australia. Couldn't find one straight out of uni. So I went a little bit broader. I looked in the data science space and ended up working for a company called Concilium Technology. They've now merged and renamed to Horizon. But that was a really incredible opportunity to go out of the health space entirely and really focus on my programming. So I was doing a lot of data analytics, data visualization, and I loved it. I went into some of these roles thinking, this isn't the industry that I studied. This isn't one that I'm super passionate about. I was doing a bit of mining, doing a bit of defense. But once I got into the data, I went, wow, this is so interesting. I just want to learn more. And I think that's something that the university teaches you. It teaches you how to learn, and then you get to apply those skills. And that was something that my first boss said. He said, we didn't hire you because you know how to do data science. We hired you because of your capacity and willingness to learn. And we want you to take those skills and apply them in. And working in a consultancy is actually a really good opportunity to get exposed to a number of different fields as well. So I was working across a number, and you transfer learnings between those fields as well. So just because you see something in mining, agriculture, defense, that doesn't mean it won't be helpful in the human body, space, or another sort of application entirely.
Such a great insight. So just to round us out, and I want to hone in on your PhD here, because there'll be people who are watching this who probably have done undergrads and they're thinking about a PhD program. Maybe parents who did their undergrad or a master's many years ago and now thinking, "Oh, I'm tempted by a PhD program, a doctorate program." What's the biggest thing or things that you've learned as part of your PhD program?
Yeah.
It could be very technical, or it could be like process oriented, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll go more on the process side. So I think a lot of people have this assumption that you have to be super intelligent to get a PhD. You have to have a degree of intelligence, no doubt, but it's persistence that is the key thing that will determine whether you make it through or not. It's a hard couple of years. You have to pour a lot of yourself into it, because you're trying to come up with a long-term project. So you're being a project manager for 3 to 4 years on something that is truly and uniquely yours. And there's two kind of schools of thoughts about what kind of a PhD program you enter. One is a PhD supervisor already has a project in mind. They probably already have funding in mind, and they're going to be very heavily invested in that project because it aligns really well with their current research. And if you go down that path, you'll be super well supported, and you'll be able to probably move quite a lot quicker because you'll have more support, but it might not be super aligned with your interest. And the other option is you come in, blue sky, pitch your idea to a potential supervisor and say, hey, this is something that deeply interests me. And that's the path that I went down. That meant I had to secure my own funding. So in my first 18 months, I won nearly $40,000 worth of research funding. And I had to then manage all of the recruitment pathways because it wasn't something that my principal supervisor was aware of or in the space of. But that whole circle moment has given me the confidence to go, you know what, I can take this further. I can lead a company in this area because I've done it all. I've done the admin, I've done the ethics applications, I've done the programming. I know everything about this application, which I wouldn't have had if I was part of a team. So there's pros and cons to both models, but it's persistence and really broad learning across different domains is what a PhD gives you.
What's next for you, mate?
Good question. I really want to see Reflect, so the virtual reality application that I've built, in not just the hands, but in the homes as of many stroke survivors as possible. And then more broadly in the spaces outside of stroke. So I built it as a way for stroke survivors or people who had lost function to be able to regain or experiment with music in a new way. But I want it to go beyond stroke, and I want it to go into the pure mainstream domain. So that's what's next. There will be some research, there'll be some commercialization in there, but trying to have more people experience music is my goal.
I love it. My guest today has been Thomas Beltrami. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me at the National Virtual Expo. Such a pleasure to hear about your whole journey through uni, getting to the end. And on behalf of everybody who's watching along live and who watched this on the recording, good luck for those last sort of critical moments, getting through, your submission of the thesis. Oh, we didn't explain that. A thesis is a very long research report. It's, as Thomas T said, it's a bit like writing a book. Good luck writing your book and getting that out into the world, mate. You can be very proud of your journey. And personally, I'm looking forward to following along as you go from that into whatever comes next, because I'm sure you're going to kick plenty of goals out there.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch.
I got my first grade at uni, and I just laughed out loud. It wasn't just a pass, I actually got a high distinction, and I'd always done terrible at school. I did the PSP course at SEU, which gave me like the foundations of what you need to be able to study at uni, and I didn't fail that, got good grades, so I was like, hey, we'll keep going. Studied a bachelor in psych, did all right, so I kept going and got into honours. And now I'm writing a thesis. Getting that first grade was the first time that I felt like I can actually do this, and it has led me to get to where I am now, and I'm really grateful of it.
Well, I hope you got something out of this session. And if you have any questions at all, you can head to choosingyouruni.com and ask Lumen. Lumen is your AI guide who knows about every university, every pathway, every option that we've talked about throughout this virtual expo. And Lumen is available to talk to you 24/7. So it's ready when you are.